Hello and welcome back. This is Chad Everett Broshears, the founder of Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia and the Human Manual. Plenty of lessons and things coming up in the near future with that. But today's episode of Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia is episode 7. And what that is today I'm going to talk a little bit about our default position. Like we like to default to certain things. Now, just for clarity, I'm speaking through the education that I'm developing and what I've experienced in life, so bear with me. I really enjoy going through logical conversations. I'm not saying that there's not other things to add in, or I'm giving you an exhaustive experience of every single facet to anything that we're looking into, but giving more of a objective viewpoint rather than latent and laced with subjective positions and viewpoints and opinions. So with that, I've been very good throughout my entire life of being objective about things and not so subjective. It's one of the reasons why my friends and family and hell, even strangers or people that will view my videos seek me out for those rational viewpoints and my acceptance of so many things. So you won't find a lot of prejudices in me. You won't find a lot of challenges. I seek things that when I find a challenge, I'd like to go after it. So with today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about our default positions. And just like our consciousness, the voice that we have in our head, we actually have an ability to train that thing, just the same as we have an ability to change things of our childhood as far as developmental precursors. We address them and we decide to mature it as a child that was, left behind in a sense. And that's part of the premise of my de-education, the Human Manual, and the series of books that I've been writing, and the educational properties that I've been putting together, the coaching that I do, and all these other wonderful things. And when I speak, publicly in different events and different associations, I speak from that. So I do occasionally have different therapists and doctors and different authorities join me, and you can look forward to some of those videos coming in the future. I have yet to sit with anybody and not discover some wonderful things that we could always go to work on. So with that, today's video again is on the default positions for things. And our default positions, I was just sharing with my partner, that there's certain challenges, like she doesn't think that she's good enough, or that I'm a better person than her, or whatever. And my simple position on that is that I just develop myself in different areas. I'm not better than her. We're absolutely equal. It's just kind of like we can view it as if you're stranded in the wild and you're with someone else. The other person may have cultivated themselves, maybe an amazing news reporter or chiropractor or any kind of PhD student or anything like that. But if they don't have any survival skills in the wild, makes them less effective, but it doesn't make them less of a person. It's just the situation demands a skill set that they may not have cultivated. And you might have been a Boy Scout or, actually be somebody who prefers their survival challenges and put yourself into those situations. So with that, let me make sure that this thing isn't too loud. Okay. So with that, it's really simplistic. Like we like to decide certain areas of ourselves, and a really great place to focus on in the maturity aspect. So there's 8 areas of maturity I identify in my works, and this would be the community maturity aspect. And so we have our community. It starts off with anytime you have more than one person, that's the beginning of a community or a tribe. So we start cultivating ourselves with specific skill sets at that age. Whatever age that is, you start to identify certain things. We still do it as adults, or we continue to do it throughout our life. But we predominantly really cultivate our lives in our earlier stages whenever maybe you're the funny kid. All right. And, other kids don't have that kind of wit or humor, which is something that will actually completely take apart that concept at a later video, talking about our developmental attributes and what we choose to make our profile or make our identity in our life. So if you are the funny kid, why are you the funny kid? You didn't slide out of the womb, throwing out knock-knock jokes, slipping on bananas, and, or the other extreme, using all kinds of vulgarity. to shock people into laughing. You develop that skill set, and then you cultivated it so much so that through the rules of neuroplasticity, you really started seeing the world that way and default that as a position to be in. That's part of the default aspect. It's through by way of neuroplasticity. And if you're not familiar with that, the real layperson viewpoint on that is, and the simplicity of it is, how you think regularly becomes your default way of thinking, because it's a habit of thinking. You're firing neurons through those portions of the brain and actually creating channels that connect so that the brain makes it a default position, or it's just easy to go there. So negative people, it's easy for them to go negative because they constantly think in such a way that they create a habit of thinking that way. And that's basically what the definition of it is just, it's more or less that creating a habit of thought, which creates a habit of action, right? But first it's thought, and that's how the machinery works, and the wetware of the brain dictating what we do and think. Now, there's a lot of different interesting arguments in that as far as what comes first, the thought or the chemical reaction, but that's not this video's purpose. But if you have any interest in going further into that, myself, and I'm going to reach out to a good friend of mine who's a doctor of osteopath, who works in psychology, and he's writing a book called Power Without Pills, and he's got quite a bit of research on that. He's a fantastic man named Frank Murphy out of Texas. So hopefully I'll be able to get him on the show as well soon. All right, so our default position, and again, I'll continue to stick with the humor facet. For those that are that use humor as a strong suit, which I used it as a strong suit, meaning that I used it as a way of getting attention and to get acceptance into groups as a young man in my youth, and it was very effective. But it had a cost to it, as everything. Anything you overemphasize has a cost, right? Because you train people to identify you in a certain way. When you don't behave that way continuously moving forward, people think that something may be wrong, because we love putting people in boxes. That's another conversation for another time. But yeah, the keeping people in boxes, the real general gist of it is it's time consuming and energy expensive to constantly learn a new program for people. Whenever you were trained that first impressions last, there's so many problems with that concept though. But anyway, again, a video for another time. Yeah, we like to put people in boxes, and whenever those people break out of that box to behave a certain way, it tends to bother us that they behave a certain way, a different way, because now it seems like they're costing us so much attention, time, and energy to learn this new attribute of this person, or they become less predictable, and people collapse predictability and trust into the same thing. Although they work together, they're not always the same thing, right? It's what your predictability factors are, whatever it may be. If you're predictable to be always late, it can be upsetting if somebody just told other people how late you can be and you show up on time. It kind of challenges the other person's honesty, even though it can potentially do that, right? And leave the other person thinking, oh, great, now they're really unpredictable, right? They're always late, and I could always plan for that. Now they show up early, and I don't even have the dip and chips out. The football game doesn't start for another 2 hours, so I adjusted my time that I told this person to be here, just because I knew that if I tell them, 4 o'clock, the party's at 6, they'll likely show up at 6:15, right? And I know people that do that all the time, that try to predict another person's actions or behaviors. So this is still relevant to the default position, because we're talking about it from the outside, the experience another person gets of it. But from the inside, we behave a certain way because it gets us accepted into our groups with minimal effort. It's easy to behave in a pattern or a profile. Most people are so unaware of it that they don't know that there is a profile present, and then they don't know that what other people know them to be or how other people know them to be. So they continue to go through their life behaving the way that they do, and they get upset whenever they find out other people don't see them the same way that they see themselves, right? Like, oh, I'm so important, but I don't have to show up on time. And then what's the conversation that takes place when they're not around is the person's not punctual, or that they're not dependable on their time frames. So whenever you're working with this person, is something to add into the process is learn that you need to predict that the person may not show up on the times that you actually had set, or that they're planning on setting. So On the personal side of it, as we develop these things, one of the problems or one of the challenges is for people that choose to default being funny because they don't know what else to do, is they like to, what they do is what people do to those individuals. Sorry, my dog was actually just messing around at the door there, so it distracted me for a moment. What they like to do, what happens is that you say you like to default to be funny, but the problem is people don't take you seriously. So it's hard to take that person serious. And whenever you finally aren't being funny for some reason, instantly there must be something wrong because your profile has been broke. There's some challenge to how they know you to be. So they instantly say some sort of, catastrophes happen. The person that's always funny isn't being funny. They must really be going through some stuff. That's not necessarily a truth. Yeah, a moment. Apparently they found the door. Okay. So with the funny side, again, that's one of the costs. There's other costs to it, but predominantly one of the most expensive parts of it, like I used to use that system, or I used to use that profile in order to get accepted into groups, is I was always funny. But I was also a chameleon. Like I was one in 6 boys. I was the 5th out of the 6 boys. So I was the second to youngest. And my oldest brother was he had cerebral palsy, so he was bedridden and he was special needs. So he required a lot of attention that was emotional attention from my parents. So I had to learn specific ways of behaving that, one, didn't upset my parents so much, and also not upset my parents so much, and and also how to make them want to be around me. I had 4 other brothers to contend with. So one of my other brothers had passed away when he was 3 years old, and that was 5 years before I was born. I believe it was 5 years. Yeah, 5 years before I was born. So there was also that emotional carryover that my parents had to deal with. So they were already emotionally challenged in a sense, by the time they got to me. So I learned to be a chameleon, and it suited me well, especially when I got to school, because this is all part of our community development. Right? We start training other people to identify us and behaving a certain way. Whenever we have them trained to identify us in a certain way, it makes it easier to deal with us, as well as it makes it easier to deal with them, because creates a predictability factor to it all. So I learned to blend in with my surroundings. And after what would come of blending in with my surroundings was people would talk about me when they would meet, like, oh, I know Chad also. They're like, yeah, well, how's he doing? And then they'll explain some things about what's going on in my life, but they may know me for being intellectual, right? And the other person may know me for being funny. And it was like as if they were talking about 2 different people. Like, are you talking about the same guy? I didn't know that Chad was philosophical. I didn't know he liked to read. I didn't know that he was an educated person or an intellectual person. And the other person would be like, yeah, no, you sure it's the same guy? I'm sure. And people have confided that they've had many different conversations with other people about me, until I actually got past this chameleon phase and really got into, hey, I am 100% me all the time. But I had to grow through what I was kind of indirectly trained to believe, because that's all part of our community development. So if you like to be intelligent, most people can become socially inept being intelligent. That's cognition is another area of maturity that we have. But that's for community purposes. This is how you train people to learn that you're a certain way. And also that by that, they also learn you're not a certain way. Now, they're not learning all of you if you choose not to share certain things about yourself. And that's all in our developmental conversations, and even in the training that I do with as far as developmental training. I've met a ridiculous amount of successful people, and success is measured in, I measure success in 8 different areas, and each area has its own derivation with multitudes of concepts of success under each one. I've met people that are, multimillionaires, self-made millionaires, excuse me, self-made multimillionaires that they feel, and you don't even have to be self-made multimillionaire. I met another guy, and he falls in the exact same thing, and I'll finish this statement. I'll finish that first statement with this one. And he had confided to me that he made $264,000 the year before doing nothing. And it's getting depressing. You know, like most people would be like, man, I just want my bills paid. And if I had a little extra and I could buy, whatever I wanted for the most part, and really have to do little work in order to keep it going, that's like retirement, right? What's on the other side of that is what you don't know. And you can be in the same situation as this gentleman. And he's a really nice guy. He has no problem telling you of his success or even sharing some of his challenges. And some of his challenges are things that you most likely, if you're not that kind of success in finance, and this goes for the millionaires, and this is also why people become ill with collecting money, like being able to generate and develop money. That's one way to look at it, is they're ill with collecting money. They're overly attached to collecting like wealth. And then there's the other side where it's not necessarily like, so when you're doing it, you don't necessarily view it as I'm attached to making money or collecting money. You're more stuck on, what am I going to do next to really generate more? Because you develop this skill set that's effective, and other people don't necessarily have that effectiveness. So you trained yourself and your community to base your experience of success off of other people's failures, in a sense. Not directly all the time, because that's almost malice in some instances and not always, but you've been trained indirectly to measure against other people, because if they failed, you know what failure looks like, and you also know what success looks like, but you may not necessarily cognitize it that way. You may not look at it or think of it that way, but it's perspective based. People from the outside have different views of you. Right? I'm sure that everyone listening to this can understand that, or at least get it. If not, start asking. Here's an exercise, by the way, which is great. Ask 5 people in your life that are close to you. Without any feedback from you, ask this question: who am I to you? What is it that you know I want to do with my life? And am I dependable? Just those 3 questions will really lighten up your life on who you really are. You may have self-brainwashed yourself to believing your resume and not really getting your character, right? Your character is what you do. Your resume is what you say, right? They're not always congruent with each other. There is a lot of time they are actually strangers of one another, but not to you necessarily. You live into your resume because it's the wishful desired side of yourself, but the truth of yourself is you may not get out of bed till noon, or you may avoid phone calls, or you may avoid responsibility, right? You may make up reasons and excuses to do things, but over here you're like, it's justifiable, Chad. You don't understand. You don't know my life. Right, I don't. Because I know your resume and what you keep saying, but your character is the one that actually tells me what you are and who you are. Right? So I keep looking at these things, and most people in your life. So you ask these 5 people in your life who you are, right? This will give you some of the root in the system to find out what your default positions are. By the way, optimism and pessimism are not default positions as much as they are elected positions. You choose to see the world one way, which, by the way, is all bullshit, and I'll explain to you why in just a minute, as it's a fun little exposing exercise for all of the froofy spiritualists out there that think that everything's great or will be great, and also for everyone out there that's a pessimist and thinks that the world is doomed, and some interesting trickery that they do to themselves, and I'm going to explain that in just a second. But if your resume and your character are incongruent, you're not going to be as successful as you want to be, even if you make all of that money that you wish to make, because most people, when they hear success, they think money, and that's not success. There's plenty of people that are wealthy that can't keep a marriage together, or their businesses keep going in the crapper, even though they've got plenty of money. They just can't keep a business alive. Like, you've inherited a lot of money, you may be an absolute business failure, and you may not give a crap about the money as much as you want to have a competing business as your friends, because at that point, most likely you have other friends that are also powerful or wealthy, there's so many different facets to it. But most people think that being rich is the answer to all their problems. And you've heard this so many times. I'm wise enough to learn through other people's life's examples and the stories that they offer. Now, I can tell you that my main driving force in life is not to become, the next Donald Trump financially, right? I don't really give a rat's ass about that. The next Bill Gates, great, but that's not my striving drive. If it's a consequence of all the actions that I put out there in the world, then I become this, uber successful person, then great. But it's not my drive. My drive is to make a difference. If I die in such a position where I really haven't amassed a huge fortune, as long as I've made a difference in other people's lives, my life becomes wealthy. That's my viewpoint, right? This is part of what I call success in my life, right? I don't want my future generations to, like, if I were in the lumbering business or the paper business, I wouldn't want my family's family, my generations and my lineage and my family line. I wouldn't want that my actions that became so obsessive that my business became such a success that it actually decimated a large percentage of rainforest in order to provide my company with the paper necessary, the paper pulp or the wood pulp to make paper. I wouldn't want, personally, I have the ability, the wherewithal to see through a lot of the delusions that I could train myself into, to know that my actions have consequences and that I could eventually damn my genetic line as well as humanity if I were to become that kind of successful in such an unsustainable business model or an unsustainable product development direction where there's a finite amount of material and I happen to be one of the people leading the capitalization of that. Money will not buy your health. And if your future generations are in such an environment that they can't be healthy, then what good is it? See, like long-term consequences to our actions. I used one that was an obvious extreme example, but I can promise you that all of my actions have thought that's within them. So it's not just thought about this obsession of completing an idea or making myself successful in a certain way, but to actually become successful in all areas so that I'm not the next person that's going to snap and do something stupid the media is going to blow up on. Right. Or, we'll call it stupid, but whatever polarization you want to attach to it or polarizing statement. So I personally do not care much for isolation development. I know that we have so many different areas to develop ourselves in. So I told you that I was going to enlighten you on optimists and pessimists. So if you allocate your attention to one direction, all right, so if you're an optimist, great, you're an optimist. Good for you. If you're doing it in such a way that you wish to get a medal because all your actions are that you're going to be an optimist no matter what and you're not going to have any upset going on in your life, that's a pessimistic view or a negative. You become an asshole. Right? Or you can become an asshole. I've run across this so regularly, and you guys know, all of you people that are watching this have had this experience, whether you are the creator of this experience or you are a witness or a secondary aspect in the conversation. But there are a lot of people that are going through some shit. They're having a bad day. They're having a hard time. They go to share it with the optimist. Most of the time, the optimist will listen just enough to make you feel like you're heard, and then cut you off with, things will get better. Why are you thinking that way? That's, by the way, why are you thinking that way is a direct scolding technique. It's not a purposeful one, but that is scolding the person because now it's making them wrong for thinking that way, which means that you have a better way of thinking. Being optimist all the time or optimistic all the time is not a better way of thinking. It can keep you from seeing doom and gloom all the time, but no, not even true. Not even true, and I'll tell you why in just a second. The same thing goes for the pessimist. The pessimist gets sick of optimists because optimists always see this wonderful world and blah, blah, blah. But yet they see the real world according to the pessimist. Usually that's their position. It's the real world. This world doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. It does and it doesn't, right? Because it's your paradigm. It's your reality, but it's a fabricated reality that's not as easily teachable. Or even it's hard, you can't even really prove it in a lab. You can prove that by thinking happy thoughts create endorphins, but you also create denial for the optimist, and actually even for the pessimist. They create denial, but their denial is wishfulness on the side that they wish to not experience something negative and secretly hoping the better happens. The optimistic viewpoint comes through, secretly hoping. And I've never really met a true pessimist to the point that they never hope for the better. Oh, they may say that it's all going to be shit or it's all going to be bad or whatever. But I have definitely met plenty of optimists that after speaking with me have admitted that they're more of a pessimist than they are an optimist. Now, here's the exercise. It's simple. Every optimist is secretly a pessimist, and every pessimist is secretly an optimist. The reason being is every gray cloud has a silver lining. In that statement, and most optimists will make this statement, in that statement, you identify the negative first, the gray cloud, right? Just in that sentence and structurally in that sentence, that's the identifier negative. And the silver lining is the identifying positive. What came first? The only way to see a silver lining is to identify the gray cloud, right? That's exercise 1. Exercise 2, really simple exercises, by the way. Somebody who's unbelievably optimistic, and you never really catch them in a negative thing, or every once in a while they seem like they wore down a little bit, but ask them how they feel about pessimists. I love that exercise. Really try it out. Don't just sit here and qualify it in your own mind. Unless, of course, you're an optimist and ask yourself the question, how do I feel about pessimists? Yeah, you don't look very nicely on pessimists. You think negatively towards them. A lot of times optimists will avoid a negative person or a negative experience. That's willful ignorance, by the way. To avoid something is willful ignorance. If you don't know enough to get over the challenge presented and you choose to avoid because of this wishful hopefulness of something better, what haunts you now will haunt you in the future. What you do not cultivate yourself or develop your skill set now to overcome will follow you. And the next time it comes up, it may not be a notice on your door. It may be the crane crashing through with a wrecking ball. Oh, it only gets worse the more you avoid things. It's the way that we learn lessons in life. You avoid certain things, things get a little bit worse. It may not be significantly worse immediately, or sometimes it goes from practically nothing that's so over you could just have such an oversight on it to being unbelievably significant within the matter of seconds. It could be that way, right? Like driving along and you're like, okay, well, I know I shouldn't be looking down while I'm driving, but oh, my phone just started ringing. Oh, and there's a second that went by and then smash, right? You either hit someone or someone hits you or something happens, right? Just using the accident in the scenario to create a little bit of validity, because you guys know that this kind of things happen. Now, most of the time you don't have such a habit that your phone starts ringing and your attention goes off of driving, which is a priority, to answer a phone, which is a secondary factor at best. Even if it's on your way to the emergency room, your priority is getting to the nurse or to the hospital over answering the phone. Even if the person that you're rushing to see is calling, your priority is to get there, right? If your priority supersedes driving, pull over. Simple. But a lot of people like to play victim at life circumstances. By the way, these are all root values, or these get back to the root value of your default position. Your default positions are obvious to other people, but not necessarily to you. Like I was sharing earlier about my partner, her belief is that she is not as good a person as I am, because I'm more loving and compassionate and patient with people and more giving and all of this. That, of course, is her own default position, because she's hard on herself, more so than I would say the average bear. All right. She's a loving, wonderful person, but she's hard on her, so she doesn't see all of the greatness because somebody made her really focus on negatives. Somebody really beat that into her. And she's really been, like, she accepted it at some point in time. Somebody made the suggestion that she should to accept it, and she did. I've had people try to encourage me to think differently of myself. A lot of times people push off their own nonsense, their own mess, their own shortcomings onto other people. That happens really regularly. It happens so frequently that it's actually it's irresponsible, and it should be a crime at times, right? Because you're really out to upset people. Just the same as people watching this and thinking the video is not perfect, so Chad has nothing to offer. He may be, he's jumped subjects or whatever. Hey, if you don't like it, don't watch it. Right? I plan on pleasing as many people as I can to watch it, but I damn sure I'm not going to be a slave to your desires. So, not at all. I don't owe you that, as you don't owe me that, right? But we all like to sit there behind the keyboard or Facebook or wherever the hell they are and make all of these crucial judgments on other people, and you don't even know who the hell they are, but you know what you just saw, right? And you base that off of past experiences that you've gone through, and you say, yep, that person's a dick because somebody else did it to me before, and I never had that resolved, so now it bleeds into this relationship that I'm now forming, whether that person's a part of it directly or not, and that person's a dick too. You don't know what the hell is going on. A lot of times this stuff is just snippets, right? But what is going on is your own machinery, your own mechanics that's at play, that has you thinking a certain way, that has you behaving a certain way. The background machinery that's going on. With that is running your life, right? If you're going around calling everybody a dick, you're most likely a dick, right? If you're going around trying to bleed your heart out to save people, you're the person that needs the greatest saving, as you're training people to be bleeding heart saviors, and it's not healthy, right? What's healthy is being well established, well balanced, well developed, and then you can start offering support for other people. All of this is inside of the community maturities. Thank you for bearing with this video, by the way. I really appreciate it. I hope that there's been benefit in this, and I look forward to my next video, which will be coming very soon. Again, this is Chad Everett Broshears. I'm the founder of Growing Up in the Wilds of Suburbia, and also the book. Look for it. It's coming up soon. The Human Manual. The first one will be the introduction and how to use the Human Manual, and the second will be the intense volumes that follow it. So it's my life's work, people. All right. If you like it, by all means, please subscribe. If you like the videos, and if you want to know more about the books, please email me. You can email or contact me through my YouTube channel or on Facebook at Chad Everett Broshears. Also, you can contact me on my email at chadbroshears@gmail.com. You're welcome to contact me if you like. I am always up for a good conversation. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please email me why you should be a guest on the show, what you've been going through, what really turns you on, what gets you excited. Not in necessarily a sexual way, but I mean, if we have to have one on that, fine. Or what gets you really motivated to talk, what really makes you want to make a difference. So with that, by all means, please email me any of that information. All right. Again, this is Chad Everett Broshears, the creator and founder of Growing Up the Wilds of Suburbia and the author of the Human Manual. Thank you, guys.